I draw a vertical straight line on one side of my pattern paper, which will be the center back guideline. One horizontal line on top of my pattern paper, which will be the neck and shoulder guideline. Then I label this point A, which is the starting point for most of my calculated body measurements. Okay. Then first is to determine coat full length. From starting point A, I measure downwards coat full length, which is 30 inches plus 0.5 inch length is giving me 30.5 inches. So I mark 30.5 inches here. Then I square across a straight line. Also, from coat hemline, I mark downwards 1.5 inch for hem allowance. Then I square across a hem allowance straight line like this. Next is to determine underarm line or chest line. From starting point A, I measure downwards chest 42 inches divided by 4, giving me 10.5 inches. So I mark 10.5 inches here. After, I square across a straight line. Next is to determine shoulder drop line. From starting point A, I measure downwards chest 42 inches divided by 24, giving me 1.75 inches. So I mark 1.75 inches here. Also, I square across a straight line. Next is to determine across back height line. So, from this chest line, I measure upwards chest 42 inches divided by 24, giving me 1.75 inches. So I mark 1.75 inches here. Also, I square across a straight line. Also, I determine belly or tummy, or you can say stomach position. I measure from starting point A to hip line, which is also the hemline, divided by 2 to get the midpoint. Then, at this midpoint, I mark downwards 2.5 inches for the position of the belly. After, I square across a straight line. Ladies and gentlemen, the 7 horizontal lines that are needed for the coat drafting project are ready. Now, I proceed to shape the back. As you know, our bodies are never straight, so to get that curvy movement at the back, I need to shape my center back line as follows. At across height line, I mark inwards 0.25 inches. At the chest line, I mark inwards 0.5 inches. Belly line, I mark inwards 1 inch. Then hemline, I mark inwards 1 inch. After, I connect these points together to create that curvy appearance at the center back. After, I go ahead and insert these calculated body measurement to these horizontal lines accordingly. I begin by inserting the neck. From starting point A, I measure inwards chest 42 inches divided by 12, giving me 3.5 inches. So I mark 3.5 inches here for the back neck width. Then at this 3.5 inch point, I mark upwards 0.75 inch for the back neck height or depth. Next is to input shoulder measurements to the shoulder drop line. From center back line, I measure inwards shoulder to shoulder measurements divided by 2. My shoulder to shoulder measurements is 20 inches divided by 2, giving me 10 inches. Here is 10 inches plus 0.5 inch for seam allowance, giving me 10.5 inches. After I connect this point to this point with this faint line, try to carve out this line slightly like this. I'm done with the shoulder area. Next is to work on across back widths. From this shaped point, I measure inwards chest 42 inches divided by 4, giving me 10.5 inches. I minus 1 inch, I remain with 9.5 inches. So I mark 9.5 inches here. After, I connect this point to the shoulder drop point in this way to create back arm line rise. Also, at this point, I mark outwards 0.5 inches for seam allowance. Okay, next is to work on the tummy stroke belly line and the hemline. At belly line, from this point, I measure inwards belly 38 inches divided by 6, giving me 6.3 inches. So, here is 6.3 inches plus 0.5 inch for seam allowance. Also, what I have here, which is 6.3 inches plus 0.5 inches, I transfer it to the hemline. Then I add 0.75 inches. After I connect these points together to create the back side seam line. Try to blend in this sharp point. Next is to insert side vents to this cord pattern. The placement of the vent stroke the slit is determined by the style you are creating. If you want your vent to be at the center back, you make sure that you mark it this side. But as for me in this tutorial, I want my vent to be on this side, so I mark it this side. From the hemline, I mark upwards 9 inches for the vent opening or height. At this point, I mark outwards 2 inches vent width. After, I square up vent lines like this. Also, mark upwards 1 inch for vent seam allowance. Then, the last thing is to curve my back neckline like this. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the back drafting. Next is to mark 0.5 inches seam allowance at the center back line. After, I trim off the excess from the back pattern. Okay. We continue working on the front.